Welcome, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and I'm recording another daily astro video blog. I am going to try to keep this one pretty short. I got some feedback from people who said make sure that you make some short videos in addition to the longer ones that I've been making. So I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter today. But we're going to be focusing on in today's little video blog on the entrance of Mars into Scorpio. So Mars just recently entered Scorpio, and there's a few, I just made some notes about the entrance of Mars into Scorpio, what to watch for, and how to navigate this planet being in Scorpio all the way until basically the end of January. So hey Tanya, good to see you. Nice to see some familiar people in here. So first advice is that whenever a planet first enters a new sign, in ancient astrology, the Hellenistic astrologers used whole sign houses. It wasn't the only house system that they used, but it was one of the predominant forms of house division. And so whenever a planet enters a new sign, in ancient astrology, it's also entering a new house. In fact, the name for a sign in a house are basically interchangeable. Traditionally, you wouldn't say that that Mars is entering the sign of Scorpio. You could also say Mars is entering the house of Scorpio, or Mars is entering its own house. The reason that houses could be used interchangeably with the terminology of signs is because a sign was always a house, and a house is always going to be occupied by one of the 12 signs. So when you use whole sign houses and a planet is entering a new sign and house, what's really special about using that kind of system is that as soon as a planet enters a new sign and house, the topics that pertain to that house are activated really powerfully. So when a planet first enters a house or sign, it's sort of like a guest is entering your home. So you can literally think about Mars entering Scorpio like Mars walking into its own home after being away for a while, after sojourning or journeying elsewhere. It comes back into its own home. What does it find there when it gets there, right? If you've come into your own house and you find a mess, you're not going to be super happy about it, right? Or if you come home and you have visitors, right? It's a totally different vibe. So Mars is coming into its house right now and finding Jupiter. Mars comes home into its own house after traveling around the zodiac for a while and walks into its front door, and inside of its house is the guest Jupiter. So everything that Mars is doing inside of its own home is already sort of toned by the presence of Jupiter as one of the guests in its home right now. So anything that you interpret with Mars is going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit grander, a little bit, more exaggerated. Maybe there's some like wisdom and karmic lessons associated with it, a sense of growth and expansion. These kind of Jupiterian themes are a part of Mars entering its own house right now. But also just think about it. When you first enter a new house, when you first enter your house, right? Let's say you've been gone for a while. You first enter your house, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, like you have that feeling like, home sweet home. I haven't been here for a while, and you acclimate. It almost feels like you're a stranger in your own house at first. It's really distinct when you first walk into your own home after being gone for a while. Same thing if you walk into somebody else's house. In the first 10 minutes that you're in somebody else's house, you feel like a total guest. It takes a while to kind of settle in and feel like you're part of the scenery in somebody else's house. So whenever a planet is entering a new house / sign, in your birth chart, it's going to immediately make a large impression. It's going to make a big splash because when it first enters, it's more energetically distinct, just like walking into your own house or a guest walking into your own house or anything like that. So you can always look at your birth chart and just say, which house is Scorpio ruling? And if you use whole sign houses or just experiment with using whole sign houses, then when Mars enters your whole sign, whatever house, you can distinctly notice that Mars has suddenly come into that area of your life. And you can literally notice it. I'm going to give you guys an example. I got a story from a client who wanted me to cast a horary chart this morning. Upon arriving to Boston to visit some friends, this client of mine arrived at a friend's apartment in Boston only to find that there was quite a bit of roommate drama going on, right? So This person walks in, they're a guest in this home, and there's roommate drama. And they find out that the person that they're supposed to be staying with for a week, after driving 10 hours from, I don't know where, it was a long way away, they had driven to visit their friend in Boston. And their friend had not asked permission from their roommates, and this person is also not technically on the lease and has trouble with their roommates. So this client just had Mars enter their whole sign first house, right? So Mars enters their first house. And when this person walked into that house, she was greeted with hostility. The roommate literally got right up in her face and started yelling at her, and what do you think you're doing? And got right up in the other her roommate's face. They're like, you're not even on the lease. Like, this is my place. What are you doing having visitors here? And it was a really intense confrontation. So in this case, Mars in Scorpio had just entered this client's first whole sign house. So there was like a confrontation. Similarly, yesterday, and so the horary question was, should I leave or should I stay? Will I be welcome? And the horary said, no, hit the road. So, but then, you got another example, which is you have, yesterday I had someone, whole sign seventh house, house of relationships. Mars enters that house and there's a blow up in the relationship. They have a big fight, right? Okay, so one thing to just take note of, Mars is like that, right? Mars is pretty intense. That doesn't mean that there's not really valuable stuff in either of these experiences, in the relationship blowout or in this person being confronted by the roommate and having to go. In both of those situations, there were other dynamics at place that I was able to talk to both of these clients about that were, pretty interesting and powerful. About like the woman who had gone to Boston said afterwards that, she really had to hold her ground and her integrity and her calm because this person got right up in their face. And the other person said there was a lot of honesty in the relationship blowout, just as Mars entered the seventh. But it was very explosive and honest, but there wasn't tact and care for one another. Okay, well, this is Mars stuff, totally, right? So let's talk now about some of what you have to watch for with Mars in Scorpio, just like overall, outside of the fact that just check out your chart and see, which house Mars has just entered. The honesty of Mars in Scorpio can be tempered with tact. It's really important. Mars in Scorpio is about penetrating into and into the darkness, into the stuff that exists behind the surface of things, into the behind superficial appearances, like what's the truth. And Mars just wants to go, and Scorpio just wants to go right for it. Sometimes we think that honesty, exposing something behind that's true, justifies ruthlessness. This is something that's big in our culture. We think that because somebody is hiding something or because somebody did something and they may deserve to be held accountable, right? But you can also harm somebody. You can also damage somebody in the way that you speak truth. Truth can be a weapon. That's not always a good thing. So think of the honesty of Mars and Scorpio and think about bringing your mindfulness so that whatever is happening, you're tempering it with tact and compassion. And that's possible. Like a good warrior is honest and powerful and exposes the villainy, exposes the whatever might not be good or correct or honest or above board. You want to get down to that truth. But if it's not kind, then you've sort of blown it, because we perpetuate the karma of the situation when we address something with the very kind of same nastiness that we're trying to call out. So to be very careful of that. On the other hand, the depth or explosiveness of Mars in Scorpio is sometimes it's karmic. There's nothing that you can do about it. We oftentimes, when we bottle things up, when we repress or suppress, the way that the truth comes out is not any different from anything else in nature that gets bottled up in the energy of the earth. Tectonic plates moving, volcanoes erupting. We're natural beings, and our bodies and our minds and our emotions work like the forces of nature. And so if it's time for something to blow, it might be time for something to blow. We have so little patience, on the other hand, for things blowing up because we want everything to look so nice and perfect and sweet. But that's not how nature is, right? I mean, we certainly can rise above our nature in some regards, and we should. But in another sense, sometimes we're just almost like allergic to just being biological creatures who, will blow up if we repress our emotions for too long or something like that. So think about that too. Honesty isn't always appropriate and it isn't always timed well. So that's another thing, is to think about timing and to think about whether or not the honesty you're sharing is appropriate. For example, are you having an honest dialogue in front of your kids? Maybe that's not entirely appropriate, even though it's honest. Maybe you're having an appropriate or an honest dialogue, but you're doing it with your boss in front of your coworkers. We have to be very careful of the different kinds of relationships that can be affected when we decide to start speaking truth, and it might be true, but it's not quite the appropriate context. These are things that Mars in Scorpio can sometimes almost deliberately use to its advantage to really dominate somebody. It's like, well, if you really want to dominate your spouse and call them out for something, I'll do it in front of the kids. That'll really get them, And we do this almost unconsciously, like the setup or the context in which we address something is such that we believe that the context will empower us and, allow us to get, to get the victory, to get the W. So you have to be very careful about the desire to win and dominate, and how that can sneak its way into how we choose to confront or address things with that Mars in Scorpio right now. Facing things, facing fear, learning to be honest with ourselves, facing things on an internal level, that's also really, really important. Sometimes we have another set of extremes that we go to. We say being honest with myself is something that, like I need to do. And then we just jump right into ruthless honesty with ourselves. And that's not kind either, right? On the other hand, we say, well, being honest with myself is something I associate emotionally with being hard on myself. And so we say, I'm not going to be honest with myself because I'm not going to be hard on myself. So as long as being hard, being ruthless, being violent is tied into being honest with ourselves, there's also a problem. So if we can face and confront things like a warrior whose sword is sheathed, the gun is holstered, like we can be honest with ourselves without drawing our weapons or without being afraid that being honest is the same thing as drawing a weapon. It doesn't have to be. That's not easy though, because sometimes there is something in us that like we can be really dishonest with ourselves, and we can be really sneaky, and we can be really avoidant, and sometimes we do sort of have to, we have to play cop with ourselves, sort of arrest ourselves, put ourselves on timeout, give ourselves a little talking to, and you have to be firm and not always totally nice with yourself either. So none of this is easy, right? If there was a rule book for all of this, or just a simple how-to, there would be no need to develop consciousness, because consciousness is what informs us how to relate to Mars in a way that is conscious. So cultivating our consciousness during a Mars transit is also really important. And that's why I'm mentioning these different things to sort of, to try to be conscious of while we're wielding the power of Mars, or while Mars is appearing in our house or whatever. Another thing that I have on my list here is to the extent that we create drama, drama creates us. Sometimes I think we also live with have a relationship to the planets that says, oh my gosh, this transit's coming, it's going to wreak havoc, and that transit's coming, and this transit's coming, and I'm getting thrown around by all these transits. And every single time a transit comes, we enter into this mindset that transits have to be dramatic, that transits have to, totally wreck us and transform us and, death and rebirth us, and we've got to go through some kind of healing crisis every time a planet enters a new house. And I think that that's another part of developing conscious relationship with the planets, is that to the extent that we kind of use our free will to create a certain amount of emotional drama around the planets, like that energy is going to start building into its own karma, and it ends up dictating our relationship to the planets. This is the weirdest advice I could possibly give, but sometimes it's better to just let Mars appear in your life. How is Mars appearing in your life? And just see how it appears, and then try having a relationship with it. Know that it's there, but try to also just forget about it. Try not to look at the astrological transits all the time. I don't look at my birth chart any longer, but maybe, once a month I'll check in just for 10 minutes. I know how to look at my birth chart pretty effectively, pretty quickly now, but I don't spend a lot of time with it because I notice within myself, and I can't, obviously some people may have a much better kind of relationship with the planets, but me, I'll start anticipating things and I'll start building the transits into things in my head. And I think especially with Scorpio, it's one of those signs where you hear planets entering Scorpio and everyone's like, woo, yeah, like we're going to get some drama now. Like we got anything entering Scorpio, and we all just sort of, freak out. Like we're all really going to, go down into hell and come out the other side. And, there's going to be some drama with Scorpio. And I just, it's just not true. It's like a lot of the times these transits, Mars may make an appearance for a couple of days over the next month. That'll be really pronounced, maybe when it hits an aspect to a planet in your birth chart. So, this kind of obsessing on astrological drama can actually amplify and create its own karma that Mars can then sort of attach itself to, and it doesn't necessarily have to. Like, not some things that are happening to us are destined, they're part of our karma, but there is a certain amount of free will that we're always operating with at the same time, and we need to use that really wisely in relationship to astrology itself. So I'm just putting this up as someone who notices that the drama seems to increase whenever the word Scorpio is used. All right, so sometimes to be alive, you have to be stirred to life. Scorpio is something that invigorates us and brings us back to life. Sometimes being poked, prodded, struggling with niceness, struggling with honesty, struggling with emotional manipulation, struggling to transform, whatever, all of these things that happen. If there is any drama, then just remember that sometimes we're not really, even though we're living, we're not really living. We're not really present. And Mars is a great planet for bringing us back to the cutting edge, to the moment of creation. There's something, very, if you think about warriors and why they're called to battle, or why someone might be called to extreme sports or extreme big wave surfing or something like that. Something about the being on the edge of life and death is where we are most alive. Like when you're aware of death, when you hold the nearness of death close to you, not with any kind of, fetish-like obsessiveness, but just an awareness of it. I'm going to die someday. Then we start living. We start, as much as we're living, to live, we're also living toward the kind of death that we want to have. Death is not something that we live in, that happens in one moment, right? Death is something that we shape over the course of a lifetime. The experience of death, many people say, is that there's a review. You review your life in the moment of death. This is important. We can't just say that that's just some kind of physiological phenomenon that happens. How we live is shaping how we die. Because we're, souls in the material world, we have to live with death in mind. That's James Hillman, a great archetypal psychologist, said, we live toward our death. The soul needs us to live toward our death. That's kind of like living with a constant memory of the fact that how you live is shaping how you die. It's a very basic part of many mystical traditions, the first noble truth of suffering and impermanence. But when we live with that, and Mars is in Scorpio, when we're stirred to life by just the difficulty or the confrontational nature of Mars, it's not such a bad thing. It can kind of be like, the shock paddles to the heart, just like, okay, I'm awake. Wow, thank you. So radical gratitude in the face of being stirred to life by Mars. Think about that. Last but not least, so Barb says, I'm a retired hospice nurse with 25 years of experience. People do indeed die how they lived, in spades. Thank you, Barb. That's really beautiful. I'm gonna remember that. remember that for sure. Last thing I want to share is we sense and feel what edges are around us with Mars and Scorpio. Be mindful of these edges. Don't be when we feel the edge when Mars is in Scorpio, it's tempting to want to detonate it. Sometimes it happens, and that's just what's going to happen. Sometimes it's a good thing to happen, but other times, like when you sense and feel those kind of edgy emotional spaces around you and with other people when Mars is in Scorpio, just remember that, like, being aware of that edge in others, in the situation, the danger, the fear, the uncertainty, the subtle emotional dynamics, and being sort of on edge about them, we don't always have to go into them. There's a kind of erotic art to living with an awareness of what's below the surface and just letting it be, sensing it, allowing it to be. It's like a dream image. When images come up in dreams, we don't always have to rush to the dream journal to interpret the meaning. We can just let a dream live and speak and develop in time. Sometimes with Mars and Scorpio, the most erotic, deep, sort of feminine warrior archetype that I can think of with Mars and Scorpio is sensing that edge and holding space for it and just sitting with it and allowing it to develop, and then maybe there'll be a time where it has to be addressed or moved into. But along with the careful timing and tact of Mars and Scorpio is also just being mindful of edges and developing a deeper sense of almost like a guardian, feeling like you're a guardian of the edge. All right, guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be probably doing something later on in the week. There's some other interesting astrological transits coming up, so I hope this was interesting and helpful for everybody. And everybody, I hope you have a fantastic start of your week.